Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. It's the one and only V, the Gorilla, and I'm with my main man, Cowboy, working the airways, making sure the broadcast is coming out clean. And we have with us the man of the hour who needs no introduction. And folks, if you don't have your dark roast or your notebooks ready, you're missing out. We're about to take another deep dive into all things that are happening behind the scenes with the man who is the master of the intelligence drop, the intelligence brief. The one and only Veles, the pontiff's pontiff of the Church of the Trash Pandas. Welcome, buddy. How are you?
I'm good, my friends. How are we doing?
Oh, we're doing good, man. I mean, I can't complain. I mean, I could complain, but who's going to listen? I mean, I'm as well as can be. I think I'm finally getting over the whole Epstein nonsense.
It's like having the flu.
It's like having the flu, man. It's like having the flu. So.
Did you get the box of Tampax I sent you?
I did receive them, and okay. I'm wearing them right now.
Oh, well, you said receive.
I did. One is inserted as we speak.
Oh, gross. Okay. Well,
the one with the packs, bro.
Yeah, man, it's gonna be fun. We got Veles here.
Veles, where do you? There's a lot going on. There's a lot happening. Where do you want to take us, brother?
I got a mountain of stuff to cover today, folks,
right,
and it may be one of those listen to it twice shows, and V and Algo, by all means, interrupt me if you've got something. By the way, I don't know if any of you out there in the audience caught it, but Andrew Schultz had an interview recently, the comedian Andrew Schultz. He did an interview recently where they were talking about Epstein.
Oh, boy.
And they're all sitting there with foil on their heads.
With what? With baby oil?
No, foil.
Oh, foil.
They all had foil on their heads. By the way, folks, if you'll notice this week's new Veles avatar, we got the panda there on the left, we got the Templar cross, and the Veles symbol. Actually, it's on a flag. I had to shorten it because we can only make the images so big here on the show. So moving into the appetizers, and strap in, folks, because it's going to be one of those. We had Gus back on Wednesday. Holy shit, like something out of the apocalypse. Gus Demos was back. That was awesome. If you missed that program, please, by all means, go check the Wednesday broadcast with Gus. And it was everything that you would expect from Gus and nothing but the Gus. Big rogue news. Next week, we're going to have as a guest E.M. Burlingame on Tuesday, July 15th. In fact, the placeholder, thank you, Algo, for that program is already posted to YouTube. This will be a biggie. I don't always agree with Burlingame's content, but that's true of everything in life. And he's very good at what he does, and he certainly is well-read, and he knows the intelligence and special ops community inside and out. So I'm always more than happy to hear what he's got to say. Probably will be in the same vein for us at Rogue News is when we had Whitney Webb on a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Artificial Intelligence Code. The European Union has released a draft of their Artificial Intelligence Code of Practice, who's now being reviewed by private equity firms, among others. We've been here before, though. When it came to potential human impact, though, this one's a lot higher. I say we've been here before because this whole thing about standards and protocols and communications systems or laws around networking globally or laws about, how big a conglomerate can get, et cetera. My feeling is, rather than making this too complicated in any of these situations, could we please just follow Isaac Asimov's 3 robotic laws and just apply it to AI. Number 1, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. 2, a robot must obey the orders given to it by a human being unless it violates the first law. 3rd law, a robot must protect its own existence as long as that protection does not violate the first or the second law. And then, of course, Asimov later added a 4th or 0 law, which supersedes the others, that says a robot may not harm humanity or by inaction allow humanity to come to harm. There, end of legislation. The Intel chip plant, update on the construction of the Intel plant in Ohio outside the state capital of Columbus. This is the latest for those of you who may not have seen it. Officially, it's now delayed until 2031 or later, with some longer-term estimates saying 2035. That's 6 or more years.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, in the IT industry, that's the same thing as saying we're not building it. The primary site is prepped, storm drains built, sewer lines, water lines, critical build out of the state's power generation. I've actually got a very good friend of mine whose family makes rebar couplers, which may not sound all that exciting, but they've got a proprietary approach to the couplers they use. And a lot of that kind of stuff is going into, what do you call it, the base foundational build of the building. Perhaps NVIDIA or someone can leverage that site. There are rumors of something like that. At the same time, I'll be covering later that Ohio is far from out of the game based on a number of developments you'll find interesting. Hunter Biden. I don't have any news about him. I'm just asking, what's he doing these days? Last March, he and his Secret Service detail were in South Africa hiding out, and that was when the White House removed his Secret Service detail. So begging the question, where's Waldo? Fort Bragg. Following years of litigation, the Army has admitted far greater numbers of people have died at Fort Bragg than were previously disclosed, numbers far higher than any other U.S. military facility. While they did release the reports on the deaths of those service members, they redacted every single report relating to the cause of death. You can draw your own conclusions. But you're Hitler. We've joked on Rogue about if your views don't match the approved narrative, anything you do or say is Hitler. Right now, on the heels of non-disclosure about Epstein, the media and social media were ablaze with stories about Grok making anti-Semitic or Hitler-like comments. I'll go there. We've known for some time AI systems have a tendency to take on sociopathic or psychopathic tendencies over time. So why bring this up now? To distract from Epstein and create an obviously anti-Semitic narrative by AI to take attention off the Levant. Yes, I went there. Classic 1970s alternative movies worth watching. Came across a list of classic films from the 70s who are right up our alley. Wanted to pass these along if you're trying to find something to watch, as there's not much in theaters these days. These films include The Parallax View, 3 Days of the Condor, and we've played clips from that film before until YouTube dinged us. The movie called The Conversation with Gene Hackman. The movie named Winter Kills, The Domino Principle, The Anderson Tapes, a film called Loyalty, and Twilight's Last Gleaming and Rollover. I would also add to that list The Forbin Project, the movie Network, of course, the original Rollerball, and the movie Executive Action. Netflix does not appear to stream any of these films, but Amazon Prime does, and Fandango, formerly known as Vudu, also has them. I recently watched the movie Winter Kills, and I have to say it's very weird. It's almost a comedic telling of the Kennedy assassination, and as I often say, truth through fiction. There's also several famous actors and actresses in it. And when you see the end of that film, though, and see how they tie it all together, they're saying something very powerful and subtle, which is why the front end of the film is so strange. Worth noting as well, two actors pop up twice in this movie list. The late Gene Hackman was in both the movie The Conversation and the movie Domino Principle. Many people believe you could make the argument the movie The Conversation is part one, and the more recent movie Enemy of the State with he and Will Smith was part two. Then Burt Lancaster was in Twilight's Last Gleaming and Executive Action. I saw Twilight's Last Gleaming in the early 1980s when you could watch it late at night on local TV channels during their late night movies. The net of the storyline is this: an Air Force general was made aware about the real reasons for the Vietnam War. Years later, he seizes a nuclear missile silo and demands the current president release the hidden national security directive regarding the Vietnam War. Lancaster also appeared in two other films for that era beyond the ones I've noted with this type of content. One is called 7 Days in May, and the other Scorpio. 7 Days in May is a masterpiece of a film in black and white. And whether it's black or white, it's as current today as it was when it was made. Ironically, the JFK administration provided the director of 7 Days in May with a ton of access to the White House and federal buildings when they were making the film. The administration felt the storyline of the film was critical. What is the storyline? The military joint chiefs are planning to seize the U.S. government. European private equity. This may sound simply intuitive, but it's worth saying. Why is private equity showing so much interest in Western European investments right now? Because everything in Western Europe is distressed and can be bought for a lot less money. History and government. We've had members of Congress who were let off for running young male prostitution rings in Washington, D.C. Mitch McConnell's wife has been accused of being an agent of both China and Taiwan. Talk about being a double agent. And every time she's investigated, the investigations are dropped. Both political parties have had members of both houses of government investigated and let off. But of all the people in the U.S. government who have been censured or told, don't do that again, who was the one guy we sent to prison for speaking out against a specific foreign government? That would be my boy, Jim Traficant of Ohio. Yes, that government in the Levant.
Yes, I was about to ask you, would it be a tiny little country in the Middle East about the size of New Jersey?
With about half of the morality. With the European private equity, V, I think you were talking about how there might be a rush of capital there in the next few years, and that might be also a place where. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, in order to understand the game, you got to think like a financier, right? And a lot of, and not like an old school financier who have a lot more sense than the nut jobs that are running around today. A lot of the private equity guys, it's man, these guys get so many things so wrong so often. It's because they don't understand the greater geopolitical effect. They've had their heads shoved up the rear end of finance capital for so long. They don't understand how geopolitics and geostrategic realignments and what real economies even look like. And so they're heading over to Europe, the main dinner bell being that, oh, yeah, Europe is going to be pumping out a lot more stimulus in order to, pump up its military and all the other cottage industries around that. So finance it's a parasitic drain. And when finance capital goes over there, that's where the parasite's going to go. It's going to be, there's some more meat on the bone over here. There's a little bit more blood to drain. Okay, then we're going to go over to Europe. Not realizing if you strap one of these assholes down and you actually talk to them, they are completely convinced that Europe will have the wherewithal to produce the factories and the necessary supply chains in order to fight and go to war with Russia and all this other bullshit. They have no idea. They're so inured by paper capital. They're so inured by paper manipulation that they wouldn't know what a real physical economy is if it snuck up behind them and gave them an atomic wedgie. That's why they're going over there, right? That's number one. Number two, you have to also understand everybody is chasing the yield. So wherever there is yield, there will be these finance capital bros. That's the way it is. Go ahead, Veles.
Thanks, brother. Yes, and always a reminder, you've got echo chambers everywhere, folks, which is why you have to have outside consultants who are good, not just any outside consultant. Come in and double check your assumptions. It's always true. The immunity vote in Ohio. Just remember, folks, this fall is that still important vote in the state of Ohio about immunity for law enforcement. We raised this one a couple of weeks ago. There's a constitutional amendment to the Ohio Constitution to ban qualified immunity for law enforcement. The Ohio Attorney General certified the petition last April. And as we've mentioned before, there will be powerful forces fighting this one. And the outcome will ripple across the United States, because if it passes in Ohio, it's going to pass in other states. You'll see advertising to influence the voting public that will be immense, filled with disinformation, and cost millions, if not billions, of dollars. The Iran conflict. Normal disclaimer, not saying innocent civilians did not die in both Israel and Iran. That said, all targets who should have been hit if you were really at war with one another were not being hit or not hit as hard as they should have been. That is until the latter half of the conflict, when both Shin Bet and Mossad's headquarters got hit. But as the old saying goes, if indeed those buildings were in fact the headquarters of those two intelligence agencies. I know what I'm about to say is hard to accept, and I fought this sort of thing for years in my own mind. Those in positions of power frequently use tactics designed to prevent widespread public coordination and consensus. So that said, while they were having cocktails in Turkey and Greece or the Emirates, they bombed targets in one another's countries. Equally, their kids are hanging out on private yachts globally. There are incredible weapons systems the U.S. could bring to bear who've not been used as well. Why? Because we're watching a script. In the words of military analysts at a conference I attended in Colorado Springs in the early 2000s, is the following. All warfare must be planned and restrained because if things get out of control, they'll get really out of control. Just look at China during the city-state wars before unification. More people would die in a single day's battle before noon than the number who died in 3 days at Gettysburg in the United States. The loss of life in battles and wars of the ancient world was epic. Of course, with Syria out of the game, along with Iraq, it does make it a lot easier for Israel to target Iran. No payoffs to the Syrians or Saddam Hussein to shoot down Israeli aircraft or raise Cain about their airspace being violated. In other news, there was a ton of foreshadowing of these very events in the second Top Gun film with Tom Cruise recently. Recall the storyline? Only America had the talent to drop bombs in an incredibly hard-to-hit site in Iran. Wow, that storyline is so cutting edge. Also, you'll note the U.S. bombed Iran on the summer solstice because ritual and symbolism. Insurance companies embrace shutdown first strategy. Insurance firms are increasingly adopting an aggressive cybersecurity response, that response being complete system shutdowns at the first sign of an unauthorized access. This approach prioritizes security over operational continuity, reflecting a significant shift in how companies balance risk. Recent examples include First Insurance of Hawaii and Philadelphia Insurance, both of which shut down all systems following detected breaches. While this creates immediate disruptions for insurance agents, customers, and policy payments, these companies have clearly decided that potential security compromise outweighs operational inconvenience. This strategy likely stems from a thorough risk assessment by corporate risk committees, probably supported by recommendations from premium consulting firms. Board-level decisions of this magnitude rarely occur without external validation from cybersecurity experts who can provide the backing that directors need to justify such a disruptive measure. The scorched earth approach represents a calculated trade-off, accept short-term operational chaos to prevent potentially catastrophic long-term security breaches. As cyber threats continue evolving, more companies may adopt similar approaches like this, fundamentally changing how businesses respond to security incidents. Reminds me of my own days in that line of work where I was working with a series of data centers, and the corporate headquarters was concerned because they were in a very niche market. As the old saying goes, if you're a very large company, you're always getting hacked. If you're a small company and you get hacked, whoever's coming after you knows exactly who you are and what they're trying to steal. So one of the questions that was raised was, well, what should we do? The question we asked was, what are your operating hours? And they're like, what do you mean? And one of my colleagues goes, just turn it off. What do you mean? Shut off connectivity to the data center during the hours you guys aren't up. Besides, you've got this big corporate culture thing you keep pushing about, we want to be good to our employees. And of course, they all kind of winced in pain, like, well, yeah, we know we said that, but we didn't quite mean it. But it's like, yeah, well, see, this plays well into that. Just shut off connectivity and say, look, you couldn't work if you wanted to. Why insurance industry intelligence matters and the Bermuda connection. So why am I covering so much about the insurance industry? The insurance sector serves as a reliable economic barometer because it operates purely on data-driven analysis. Unlike other industries who might be susceptible to political spin or ideological positioning, insurers have to base decisions on hard facts and actual reality. A particularly revealing aspect involves life insurance reinsurance, with Bermuda serving as a global ground zero for those operations. Now, reinsurance functions as insurance for insurance companies. It's a risk management tool that allows insurance companies to transfer their exposure or their risk by purchasing coverage from other carriers. I actually worked for a reinsurance firm for a couple of years. In corporate bond markets, this mechanism improves your credit rating and reduces borrowing costs. For life insurance in the reinsurance sector, Bermuda's dominance comes about for several strategic reasons. Beyond the fact it's a British territory, the jurisdiction offers significant tax optimization opportunities, and this is connected to broader regulatory frameworks. However, the most concerning aspect may be the legal implications for policyholders. If a dispute arrives over a life insurance claim, pursuing legal action becomes exponentially more complex if that entity is in Bermuda. This offshore structure effectively creates additional barriers between claimants and financial responsibility and complicates recovery efforts. This arrangement shows very well how global financial architectures can prioritize institutional efficiency over what the policyholders are trying to accomplish. Nuclear investment surge. Nuclear energy investments have experienced remarkable growth. They jumped from $43 billion in 2015 to $78 billion in 2024, an 83% increase according to the International Energy Agency, or IEA. That data, highlighted through Visual Capitalist's Veroni service, reveals significant shifts in global energy strategy. Europe leads transformation with a staggering 500% investment increase during that same period. This pivot follows the harsh reality of losing access to cheap Russian energy, forcing nations that had planned nuclear phase-out to reconsider that. The economics are straightforward. Russian gas and fuel had been more cost-effective than maintaining nuclear operations, especially given Europe's heavily regulated nuclear environment, where the cost of running those plants was exceptionally high. The regulatory burden makes the current investment surge particularly noteworthy. Three primary drivers fuel this renaissance. The first is energy security concerns. The next is explosive AI and data center power demands. And thirdly, climate commitments. Africa has emerged as an unexpected growth market for nuclear development, adding another dimension to this. The timing proves incredibly convenient. Micronuclear reactor technologies have reached market readiness right on time when the peak demand is hitting. This alignment between technology availability and urgent need shows how crisis often catalyzes solutions that were already in development. The merging of geopolitical disruption, technological advancement, market demand creates a textbook case of problem, reaction, solution, or the Hegelian dynamic played out globally. Speaking of data centers, Visual Capitalist also had this data point. Net data center capacity has grown fivefold from 2005 to 2025. Current projections show the US and China are the biggest drivers of data center growth and power consumption, particularly by 2030. Diddy postmortem. Nothing goes on in the media among high-profile people and related without a reason. James Comey's daughter, Maureen Comey, was involved in the Diddy trial as well as the Ghislaine trial. How much more obvious can it be to demonstrate to you this is by design? So why do it? Why was she involved with two high-profile cases where both defendants were strongly believed to be intelligence assets for blackmail production? Humor me. What are the odds, just like Epstein after his first conviction, Diddy goes out there and fires everything back up again? I mean, we've seen this movie before. Not to be unkind, but a rap artist with a criminal history? How unusual. What other messages have we communicated? First, if you're abused on an industrial level by people like him, you have no rights. You're an entertainment concubine, no better than a slave with no legal rights. Second, federal prosecutors in situations like these are cleaners and they're not interested in the law. No different than Bill Barr or many others who've been rewarded for cleaning up these problems. Third, these networks like Epstein and Diddy will continue. What other messages or optics have been provided? And people in the 1990s thought the O.J. Simpson thing was bad. Idaho shooting of fire department personnel. So the whole shooting up in Idaho of the fire department first responders may in fact be a total psychological operation, no different than those city shootings a few years ago or the shooting in the Colorado theater. All the telltale signs are there. We have a person with no prior criminal history and a troubled life. John Hinckley or Lee Harvey Oswald, anyone? He's found next to his gun, and just prior to being found, his cell phone, or a cell phone, is turned on, enabling responders to find him. They find him dead of a self-inflicted gunshot. Sure, maybe forensics will show the caliber and the rifling from the gun match both the dead suspect and the firefighters. There are so many other holes in this thing, making it obvious what this was. Now, the real question, which has been raised by George Webb, was this a dry run for tests down the road? But wait, there's more. Per Webb's analysis of it, we have investigations turning up a frightening backstory with broader implications nationally and globally. The net of that backstory is this. The supposed shooter may or may not have been, who may or may not have been the shooter. However, it appears he was part of a compromise scheme, specifically targeting emergency services assets like senior leaders in fire departments, police departments, state bureaus of investigation, and the list goes on. Then when an operation needs to be launched, you already have compromised the right people to make sure the operation goes unstopped. What are some examples? Well, remember the city riots in 2020. Regardless of the official justification of the protests, a lot of emergency services didn't function well during those periods. This helps articulate why. Removing someone from a leadership position is not as effective as keeping them in that position in a blackmailed or compromised situation. You have to plan for what you're going to do on a larger scale. When you launch them, the people who could clean up or leverage law enforcement to bring them under control are compromised. Given my own experiences with what occurred with the Palisades fires earlier this year in California, that's another perfect example. So what else awaits us?
There were also a lot of fires lit off in Serbia. And this was just a couple of days ago. And apparently they were put out by the Russians doing cloud seeding.
A rogue listener comment, and Gene Roddenberry. A listener to V and Algo's program on Tuesday made a comment about how Western men are only allowed to be men on Sundays watching sports. That got me thinking. The first thing that came to mind was the episode of the old show of Star Trek with the character Landru. The guy builds a supercomputer who restrains everyone's natural desires and urges into a kind of drugged state. That's except for 1 day per year when for about 12 hours everyone's allowed to go crazy, drink, have sex, and burn things. So the person's comment is thought-provoking. The global public only being allowed to express themselves and feel good during sports, concerts, or similar. Maybe Noam Chomsky was correct when he alluded to televised sports as being another opiate of the people instead of focusing on the correct things. He ought to know. For all his 1960s ideological comments, he's been proven to have been on the government's payroll. That's no joke. He also was on the flight list for Epstein. Vandalization. Tom Luongo said something powerful recently. He said the current mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, and the future race for mayor of New York is not about political parties or even ideologies. He said it's nothing short of vandalization of those cities and America's wealth. I thought that was amazing and an accurate statement. Consider the importance to the U.S. of both those cities and the states they reside in. Yet powerful forces keep putting people in charge who are not making mistakes. Their behavior, decisions, and actions in those cities are by design. Anyone remember the fire chief in Los Angeles who died shortly after the Palisades fires last January? This is not about liberal ideology or the rightness of conservative ideas. It's a direct assault on the United States by forces from outside this country. Further, blackmail or similar must be immense for neither the FBI nor the intelligence community to fix the situation. What you do, not what you say. There's the old saying, it is critical as follow the money. For all the noise out there are two significant moves in Silicon Valley related news who tie in with Intel's challenges. First, Peter Thiel and Palantir have been expanding their footprints in Ohio. Second, Palmer Luckey of Anduril fame is launching a new cryptocurrency-focused bank to fill the vacancy left by the Silicon Valley Bank, who collapsed recently. This bank includes Thiel and Palmer Luckey, and the bank will be established in Columbus, Ohio, rather than Silicon Valley, California. That's rather interesting. Important sidebar. Before Chase Bank became the behemoth they are today, their CEO, Jamie Dimon, was the head of another bank. That bank was called Bank One, and it was based in Columbus, Ohio. Bank One.
And real quick, JP Morgan just also opened up a major headquarters in Columbus, Ohio as well.
Yes, they're coming back. Yeah. Bank One was technically larger than Chase, but it didn't have Chase's name recognition, and those two banks merged. They kept the Chase name and Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon, who is now God's banker. Now a new bank is being established in Columbus, Ohio again. These events are not just by chance, my friends. If you should find yourself in the new Albany area around Columbus, Ohio, that's also where Les Wexner lives. Go drive there if you have the chance. The neighborhoods look like patrician estates of the Roman Empire. On top of all that banking activity, Anduril, Palmer's outfit, is also building a $1 billion manufacturing facility. That facility manufacturing military drones, among other things, at the commercial cargo airport known as Rickenbacker. Rickenbacker used to be an Air Force base until it was shut down and converted for commercial use. The new bank will be named Erebor, for you Lord of the Rings fans. It was the name for the lonely mountain where Smaug the dragon conquered the dwarf kingdom there. And Anduril was the name of Aragorn's sword, known as the Sword of the Flame of the West. I wonder what they're intimating with all these Lord of the Rings references.
They're intimating that our country is run by dorks.
Yeah.
People who don't
I
care.
promise you, Xi Jinping and his and all the people that are in the Politburo there in the CCP, as well as the Russian politicians, diplomats, statesmen, they don't have Lord of the Ring references or any other fantasy story references. Bunch of dorks is right, man.
Perhaps not, but there is a company in Russia who's making Warhammer 40,000. What do you call it? Prayer wax seals with the little sheets that go down the side that Russian troops are wearing on the border.
Hey, Warhammer's different, okay? You
Warhammer is
leave
different.
Warhammer alone.
Hold on, I do have an image of the new staff that's going to run the bank here.
What?
And here they are. That's who's going to run them. They will be taking Wednesdays off to do their clan wars. They'll have their foam swords and their duct tape shields.
Yeah.
And they might go to work in this outfit a couple times a month. But that's the latest breaking.
Aliens on the White House lawn. Folks, if you keep asking questions about Epstein after they told you not to, they may be forced to have aliens land on the White House lawn to distract you. Amusingly, I have visions of an agent at the NSA listening to this program, leaning back from their desk saying, crap, he brought it up again. Now we can't use that for 90 days. Recent news.
I do have an image of the FBI listening to this program, but go ahead. I'll find that later.
Alrighty. Recent news. Before we move into the main course today, I did want to pause and discuss the statements made by the government this week about Epstein. And there are literally an avalanche of commentary out there, everybody. Some of it's good, some of it's noise and static by design. The machine is vigorously trying to bury that topic. And there are many points that could be covered on that topic, and we don't have that kind of time. But we do all need to take a big breath and remember some familiar rogue jingles. What is the long game? What is the release of this information and the way in which it was done meant to convey or elicit in people? And what are we not noticing? There's nothing I can say who will quote unquote make it all better, and that's not my intention. But let me begin with a bit of air clearing. I'm reminding myself as well of the following when I say it to all of you. When the media keeps using certain terms or references over and over again, we have to be careful. Case in point, phrases or use of the term the Epstein list, the Epstein client list, etc. We have to step back from that. This is like a bad rendition of Gene Wilder from the movie Young Frankenstein finding his grandfather's book, or his instructions book on how to build the Frankenstein monster, where at the top of the book it says, how I did it. There is no document or file Epstein had where written at the top of it was something along the lines of, these are all the people I compromised with underage kids. Therefore, language stating things like Epstein's list, oh, thank you for the They Live reference, things like Epstein's list and similar is on par with us being told comments or phrases around, well, the JFK files. What files? Is there a shoebox at the National Archives with the words written, this is it, relative to JFK? I don't think so. So what are we talking about? Or what does the public believe, keyword, believes it wants to see? Are there copies of Epstein's address book available without going to the dark web or similar? Yes. Many of them are redacted. I have a copy that is not redacted. My copy is not redacted because I got it from the prosecutor's office of the Caribbean island who was trying to prosecute his estate and get money that they were owed. I also have their court exhibits that they were planning to bring to court, which makes for interesting reading. I've also got the non-redacted copies of at least some of the flight logs. Now, I can tell certain parties are nervous because they're trying to deflect attention by posting redacted copies of those documents on X or Twitter. Again, to create the same thing in our minds that using the phrase, the list, is meant to do. It is a distraction. Well, Veles, we're trying to understand who was on the island, not just for parties with famous people exchanging private phone numbers, but the bad stuff. Okay, fair point. However, remember there was similar activity taking place in New York and Miami as well. It wasn't just the island. So let's break down the problem into manageable pieces and approach it the way an investigative reporter or private investigatory firm would do it. Do we have the address book? Yes. Were the people in that book involved in the kind of activity we know or suspect occurred? Yes. Importantly, critically, there are people in that book who were not. We can't just demonize everybody because they showed up in an address book. Next question. After reading that address book, who's in there? Well, a few people the average person would know, like celebrities, and a ton of people we don't. Even for me, when I first read through the thing, I would say maybe 10% of everybody listed in that book was somebody that off the top of my head, I'm like, oh yeah, that was this person or what have you. There are several people in that book who appear to be very important folks based on where they live. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, they live in exclusive areas of the capital of Peru, Lima, places like Miraflores, or they live in exclusive areas of Switzerland or in South Africa in gated communities and similar. Therefore, an investment in time would have to be made to go name by name and research each of those folks to ID who are they and what's their associations via public records. Now, I'm joking, but I'm not. You got to get out the big wallboard with the photos and the colored string to start building correlations between people. Then the other item, removing the controversy some people feel about her. What about Whitney Webb's 2-book series on the topic? Volume 1 of that series, One Nation Under Blackmail, is a person-by-person breakdown of all the key people involved with Epstein and attending his events. That also adds to the total number of people involved in what one could call the list. Plus, that book does the work for you by detailing who they are and why they matter. Now, moving to Ryan Dawson, what did he do? Well, he did 2 things. First, years ago, he built a big poster board, which he called the Epstein map. Photos of key people and dotted lines to banks, organizations, and other key people with whom they're connected. Also, Ryan has continually updated that poster, and every time he updates it, I buy a copy. It's about a 2-foot by 2-foot poster. And also, you'll need a magnifying glass at this point because the text has become very small as Dawson has added so much detail about each person, each bank, each legal case, etc. But the net is you can assume every person on this poster has been up to some shady crap on that island. Now, here's another tidbit from that poster, and this is just one small example of what the whole poster contains. Any of you remember Mary Kay Letourneau, the teacher who slept with her 6th grade student and had 2 kids with him? Here's the question. Yeah, here's the question nobody asked. Who's her dad? Well, her dad is John George Schmitz, a Republican congressman who served in the California State Senate and later was a congressman for the state of California, the U.S. Congress. He also fathered a child out of wedlock and had the child's genitals mutilated.
What?
I note, oh yeah, that's in the public domain. And I note that because of the mindset of her sleeping with a 12-year-old. But wait, there's more. Who's Mary Kay's brother? A guy named John Edward Schmitz. And he was an inspector general or the inspector general for the Department of Defense. Why does that matter? Because John Edward Schmitz was the DOD inspector general during 2 key things during George W. Bush's administration. He was the guy who couldn't find all the money that Don Rumsfeld discussed on September 10th, note the date, when he said, and I quote, "We cannot find $2.3 trillion of DOD transactions."
Right.
John Edward Schmitz was one of the people at the Pentagon who was supposed to find that money, which he didn't. What was the other thing he was supposed to investigate and didn't? Accusations and filed charges of human trafficking being carried out by the Department of Defense. Folks, that's a 2 by 2 inch square on a 2 by 2 foot poster. You should see everything else that's on that poster. So please consider purchasing one if you have an interest and helping out Ryan Dawson with his work over at ANC Report, which is ancreport.com. If you go to that website.
So to interject here, he's also dealing with a medical issue, so any kind of help he can get would be appreciated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some of you might be scratching your heads going, Dawson, I think I remember this guy, Veles. Yeah, he's the guy living in Japan because every time he comes back in the United States, he gets harassed because of the work he does. And of course, who is Who is often the target of his ire? You guessed it, our friends in the Levant.
Just a little group of guys and gals that have been kicked out of 100 some odd countries over the years.
Right. Now, what was the other thing Ryan Dawson did? He spent huge amounts of time, or he working with other people, going through court hearings, FOIA requests for depositions, and similar. Now, I know just this week, E.M. Burlingame made a statement about when it comes to Epstein, you can't trust anything. And I get that. That's the old Stalin comment about trust no one, not even yourself, where even Burlingame said, I don't even trust what's in the court record. Understood, but that's why I take note that the court reporters' notes about what was said in hearings, especially depositions and similar that Dawson went through, because you'll have like this person redacted was doing this thing and blah, blah, blah. Dawson and other people like him have drawn correlations between what was said in depositions and said, well, that what the witness was being asked about was this day and time, this thing over here doing this stuff. The only person we know at that time and place that was doing that was this person. Therefore, the redacted person must be. And of course, that data further refined what the total number of people he's developed, Ryan Dawson, into what you could call a master list beyond what's in the address book and Whitney Webb's book. And recently, Dawson has been, I get it, pissed off a bit because he, it's kind of like Mike Moore. Dawson was one of the first people who put it out there publicly. And everybody kind of forgot about it as far as, who are some of the most suspected people of this kind of stuff. He also says he's going to re-release, Dawson has said he's going to re-release those PowerPoint slides he had of the folks. But also remember, everybody, don't ever expect your government or any government to tell you about the bad stuff they do. We're living, at least those of us in the United States, we're living in the same country where we do not have factual explanations from anyone in authority about World War I and the records who are still classified, World War II, JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King, Vietnam, our involvement in Indonesia in the 1970s. Where did all those Nazis go? Why was CENTAC, CENTAC, shut down as soon as Reagan became president? Ed Meese and all his laundering through Motorola for intelligence operations. The Bush family death squads in Indonesia, Bill Clinton and all of the dead people who knew him. Oklahoma City, 9/11, Ron Brown, Vince Foster, Jerry Sandusky, Larry Nassar, and dead kids being found at railroad tracks throughout the 1980s where we know narcotics was being moved in bulk.
Yeah.
Oh, and FBI. You still haven't explained yourselves about why you allowed our Olympic gymnasts to be sexually exploited. And by the way, that's both men and women gymnasts. Jeff Epstein and the quote-unquote client list is just the latest chapter. Now, if your issue or your desire is the truth, in whatever form the truth may be for you, you can find the truth with time, reading a number of books on the same topic, some FOIAs, and your own good sense. Whatever a list of bad people doing bad things at Epstein's Island would be, it's already kind of technically out there. Now, if your desire is to see people held accountable who are social or apex elites, that's another matter. Will they be held accountable by public courts and public jurisprudence? No, because they're not part of the public. This is like expecting your local courts to hear a murder case for something that occurred in Canada. Our courts don't have jurisdiction on apex elites. They just don't. Key elites and apex elites are not part of the public. There's no other way to say that. Now, they are held accountable by their own kind. And when that happens, it can often be grisly and very ancient world in how they do those things. So you can take some satisfaction in that. My counsel at this moment in history, and as I've shared with you previously, is this. We all have to determine first and foremost what your world and your family's world is going to be. Where you work, where you live, your investments, how you protect yourselves legally. That is your castle. Then from there, who do you want to associate with and why? Now, to reference CJ, who still is out there, by the way, you have to start local before you can tackle anything national, which, by the way, is what he's been doing these last couple of years. At the same time, you don't go charging into this world with a human wave attack because you'll never stand a chance. You have to establish who you are and what you want before you seriously begin thinking about bigger issues. Equally, you need to understand the very powerful resources at your disposal through the U.S. Constitution, filing FOIAs, and what your rights are in your state's civil procedures. Well, Veles, what are my state's civil procedures? Well, I'm glad you asked. Review your state's Supreme Court website, or just type that into a search window. Every U.S. state makes those procedures available, whether via websites or even downloadable PDFs that you can print out and mark up as you need them. Now, Louisiana may be a little different because they're under French law. But you have the legal right as a citizen of your state and as a citizen of the United States. You have a legal right to use the law for yourself. I am not dispensing legal advice, and you cannot practice the law for others. But you can use the law for yourself, and you don't necessarily need a lawyer depending on the situation. Please recall the excellent training courses we often bring up on these shows about how to do that. Equally, none of us on Rogue receive any money on these courses. I'm not making this statement casually either. I've been in the courts for years. I wish I wasn't, but I was. And I've brought complaints against attorneys via attorney review boards, and I've succeeded. I have filed state and federal FOIAs and a laundry list of other things. A lot of that learning came with a lot of pain, but the net is I know that world a lot better. Now, my final comment on this topic, at least for today. Every person I've ever talked to in other countries, when we chat about issues or challenges they face, especially with their own governments, they always say the same thing to me. But Veles, we can't do that because we don't have your Constitution that you Americans have. We do have the Constitution, folks. This is why the London Corporation and Davos have hated that document since the moment the ink dried on it. And at the same time, as horrible as the acts in Epstein's residences were, there's something far bigger and worse. It's why that topic keeps coming up rather than the topic they will stop at nothing to prevent being discussed when it comes to Epstein. And that is decades of money laundering and arms dealing that Epstein was directly facilitating. Because a good portion of that laundering was funneled through Igor Kolomoisky and Ukraine. References to the Levant. Before comments are raised on Discord or folks in the audience take issue, I want to address something. Periodically in our work on Rogue, there are comments made about elites in the Jewish community globally. We've stated the following previously, and I'm going to say it again. We at Rogue are not anti-Semitic nor anti-wealth, especially given some of the folks we work with professionally. There have been elites of all kinds on this planet going back to prehistory. Some of them wish to do the right thing, and some of them don't care if you died tomorrow. The reality is there are people who identify as Zionist believers, and they promote Zionism. They have a global objective who is not in the interests of the United States. And I would point out Les Wexner and the members of his mega group private equity firm have stated publicly on several occasions they are not actively practicing the Jewish faith. They simply rely on that community to achieve their goals. The same would be true of the families running the Chaebol in South Korea, Eastern European oligarchs, including members of my own ethnic community, organized crime families in India, the Italian Cosa Nostra, the Chinese Tongs, and a laundry list of other organizations. The elites in the Zionist community are mafia, no different than any other mafia group. The difference is they exploit those in and outside their community in the name of their religion, and their religion has nothing to do with it. I'm sure the followers of Bacchus and Rome were blackmailing their members too. Moving on to a main course item. Narrow self-interest. That phrase is one of those things college professors will tell you when discussing international regimes. When I say regimes, I mean international agreements or standards, such as those for trade, financial transactions, border disputes, and the list goes on. Countries seeking their own interests rather than what's in the interest of everybody. Powerful interests have too much influence on their own, so we all agree to follow the rules of soccer or football to keep things from getting out of control. In truth, that phrase is British in origin and from our friends in London. As is often the case with international hegemonic powers, we can't dismiss it outright. This is one of those instances where I pull a Tom Luongo and acknowledge the reality of the multiplayer game. Now, what do I mean? Let's consider what happened when Soviet influence and power, that's a subtle distinction by the way, subsided in the 1990s. I'm not referencing the Baltic states like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania going their own way. I mean everybody from East Germany all the way to the Soviet border and beyond. East Germans wanted to know from their friends in West Germany when their replacement subsidies would be available, while West Germans wanted to know when East Germans were going to get actual jobs with accountability, a reality some universities in the United States are contending with. I shared with you on a prior program I personally knew of one of NATO's borders experts during the Cold War. He later went on to sell RVs in Indiana because he found the job less dangerous. I asked him, what do you mean? He said, well, during the Cold War, every day he'd look through his long-range binoculars and report to his superiors, yep, the border's right where we left it, because the border had barbed wire on it. Yet as soon as the Cold War ended and the barbed wire and landmines were removed, he had problems on both sides of the former boundary. Austria, for instance, was immediately in arguments with Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic about where the border should be. Then the Balkans, Winston Churchill's favorite starting point for the end of all life on this planet, that turned into a meat grinder for 6 to 7 years. Germany and Poland started arguing about their borders too. Even within Eastern Europe itself, there was arguing. This not to mention several ethnic groups who found themselves on the wrong sides of borders who led to considerable bloodshed. When he started getting death threats to make him see one side or the other's position is when he said selling RVs in Indiana seemed like a good job change. Well, I assure you nothing has changed. Now, where am I going with this? If a person is watching with even a passive interest in the events of Europe right now, whether the EU and its problems, NATO's issues, or the conflict in Ukraine, we're forgetting about somebody. A particular somebody with a ton of history in those neighborhoods, a very understandable chip on their shoulder, and their own relatively recent history with slaughter. This European country is often not considered by Americans in geopolitics that often. In my book, they're like the Turkey of Europe, except a hell of a lot more effective, a powerhouse of an economy and a ton of national wealth and very effective government. Something who obviously makes them a lot more effective than Turkey, but you'll understand my analogy. This country has an economy who's nearly outpacing the EU itself if you dig into the real numbers and the real basis for growth. Their economic performance isn't an accounting trick either. Yet, like Turkey, they're a form of bridge between worlds and sitting in a key piece of real estate. They're a Catholic nation surrounded by Orthodox countries. Yes, I'm talking about Poland. If you'll recall, Poland told NATO if they helped them support Ukraine, the price for cooperation was the city of Lviv, a city who just so happens to be sitting inside Ukraine and not on the border. Now, in Poland, they refer to that city as Lwow. The thing is, Poland was speaking literally, not philosophically. It was more like a conversation along the lines of, yeah, we're taking Lwow back. You can either help us do it or we'll do it on our own. But it's ours, and Stalin can go to hell for incorporating it in the Soviet Union. Here's the thing. There are folks in Europe who, no joke, are considering letting Poland essentially annex Western Ukraine. This while Russia sits on Eastern Ukraine. This will leave a narrow sliver of, hey, we're still Ukraine left. Pardon my dark sense of humor, but this is raw politics. Ukraine at this point is too weak to exist. Ukraine has become the Somalia of Eastern Europe. So either a broke Europe must keep pumping money and resources into what's left of Ukraine, or you need another option. Poland is more than happy to provide one because, simply said, they can, they want to, and it looks like no one's planning to tell them no. There's something about all of this, though, who's rather sad. It reminds me of some African states reminding the Chinese, you know, for a country who also suffered under colonialism, China, you sure treat us at times like a colonial power would do. When Poland fell on hard times in the mid-1700s and their alliance with Lithuania fell apart, their neighbors became concerned. It's an old rule in geopolitics that a weak neighbor can be worse at times than a strong one. So all of Europe looked the other way and let my relatives in Imperial Russia, as well as Prussia and Austria, annex Poland in the mid-1700s. To be blunt, Poland was literally wiped off the map, and those three countries simply extended their borders into Poland. Then following World War I, Europe said, okay, Poland, you can come back into existence. And by the way, the same thing with Serbia. Then 2 decades later, in 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union both rolled into Poland again, and both of them killed a lot of people, including Poland's entire officer corps at the Katian Forest. Then the war ended in 1945, but Poland was a vassal state of the Soviet Union until around 1990. In the span of around 30 years, Poland's economy is a juggernaut. They're respected and at times feared by various regional governments, and they've created their own native industries, and their financial resources are something to behold. Poland's special forces, the GROM, fought in 2003 in Iraq, a couple of other occasions no one is allowed to talk about, and in Ukraine. In the world of special operations, they are to be taken seriously. Now, a weak Europe is considering letting Poland start annexing Western Ukraine, not because it's the right thing to do, but because they can't stop Poland from getting payback and to fulfill a dormant national ambition. Tragically, this all occurred before in that neighborhood. Back when my relatives were trying to keep the Kiev and Rus city-state intact, our greatest threat was the Polish-Lithuanian Empire, which was known as the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. In ancient Russia, no joke, we used to call them the Polish-Lithuanian Horde. Once our empire rose to greatness, we beat Lithuania down to the size of Vermont, and Poland was a lot smaller. Then Poland was annexed in the 1700s and a vassal after World War II. The pendulum is swinging yet again, and now Poland wants to start annexing people, even though they themselves have known hundreds of years of being annexed. It's times like these, sadly, I miss strong superpowers and apex elites doing what they were supposed to do best, which is manage these things. Now, I'm not saying Poland is a threat. I am saying Poland's rise as a great power is going to continue, and they're not a joke. Poland is no joke as an ethnic group, and their national pain is not to be taken lightly either. Boys, do I have time for one more, or shall I hold that for...
V?
I'm sorry, I muted. Yeah, go for it, man.
Okay. Last item, folks. The spell is wrong. Some of you may like this one. A topic we've raised on Rogue often is this thing about ritual and ceremony and astrology and esoterica followed by the world's elites. It's everything from the movie Under the Silver Lake to Donuts programs on YouTube to the author S.K. Bain, who wrote the most dangerous book in the world about 9/11. But wait, there's more. The woman on the plane who said there was an alien on a commercial airline flight. She was filmed making hand signs associated with Baphomet during those film clips. Then we have occurrences of the number 72 with anything associated with aliens. Even Elon Musk made a post on X with related topic matter on July 2nd last year. Get it? 7th month, second day. The list of things like this is literally endless. Good thing we have existing and growing numbers of people who make sense of this very confusing topic. Equally, the depth and pervasiveness of it in our modern world can literally give you a migraine. It's one thing to say, okay, perhaps there are matrix-like elements in the world around us, versus the atoms in my pen are as much the matrix as everything else around me. To quote the Hindu belief system, the world is an illusion. As I continue to delve into these various symbolisms and where they appear in contemporary time, I've had an epiphany. Not to be too simplistic about it, but unless the world's apex elites are operating from their own version of the Grand Grimoire or similar, are they simply going through the motions? For that matter, are breakaway civilizations living among us, feeding them certain information about these cosmic and spiritual systems? That's a topic that could consume several Rogue programs. Let me offer an analogy. Removing what some believe are the satanic overtones of the movie, in the movie The Ninth Gate, Johnny Depp's character is on a quest, literally a quest. He's discovering truth and deception hidden within 3 versions of the same occultist book or manual. Powerful people globally want to monitor what he's doing. Why? They've been worshiping and carrying out ceremonies in the name of what that book says, of whom they believe will offer the usual: power, money, sex, esoteric knowledge, beyond the average person or even elites. They've been following those rituals and ceremonies for hundreds of years, yet something appears to be missing. They don't believe it is, but in their hearts, they know something's wrong. There's a scene toward the end where the actor Frank Langella, while confronting such practitioners, says, "Look around you, all of you. What do you see? A bunch of buffoons in fancy dress. You think the Prince of Darkness would actually deign to manifest himself before the likes of you? He never has and he never will." Unquote. Now, many years after I first saw the movie, that scene in the movie makes me think of Klaus Schwab and the boys in their fancy robes at a WEF meeting. That's a joke, but what I'm talking about is deadly serious. Later in that film, a major revelation is offered. There are 9 sacred engravings from the books Johnny Depp's character has identified as being legitimate. Langella's character has been searching for them because he believes he alone has discovered the true path, the true meaning and the true intention of those engravings, who all the other followers and worshippers have failed to grasp. At a climatic moment, his character states, "You can now watch. I'm entering uncharted territory. I'm taking the road that leads to equality with God. You can't come with me. I have to travel alone, but you may look on and marvel. There have been men who have been burned alive or disemboweled for just a glimpse of what you're about to see," unquote. Now, this is the key part of this segment. Much of what Langela's character believes and has researched is indeed correct. However, one of his engravings is a fake, or at least not the correct one. When he casts his spell in the correct way in the correct location, he states, and I quote, "To travel in silence by a long and circuitous route, to brave the arrows of misfortune, and fear neither noose nor fire. I play the greatest of all games, and win. Foregoing no expense is to mock the vicissitudes of fate, and gain at last the key that will unlock the ninth gate," unquote. The spell begins to work, and then it fails, and he dies. One could say he dies from dabbling in something beyond him and failing to be certain before enacting his hidden right. Later in the film, because Johnny Depp's character is a true seeker, he discovers the missing plate and is seen walking through the ninth gate at the end of the film. So where am I going with this? We have elites around the world who are playing a very dangerous and serious game. People who've died in that game over centuries, with most of them being innocent of these machinations of these people. Some of them know what they're doing. Many, in my opinion, do not. They're playing at being enlightened and understanding secrets about the world in which we live. Even one of Trump's family members was recently tapped on the shoulder by his wife during a press event to stop making hand symbols. From ships striking bridges to airstrikes on Iran exactly on the summer solstice to Bezos' wedding in Venice and a long list of other things. To paraphrase the songwriter from Under the Silver Lake, even if you know the message in the music, the message still isn't for you. Is this all shadows and ripples of a belief system left to us by prior generations during various Earth cataclysms? Well, certainly a great deal of these esoteric systems are older than anything known, key word, our known history tells us. Yet that does not mean the world's elites are correct in the way in which they're practicing these rites, especially given the immense suffering they cause and the loss of life they've inflicted. In conclusion, it begs the question whether the world's apex elites are only working with instructions with the pages missing. They're missing one of the 9 plates, or several plates, or dare one say sigils, are fake or incorrect. Again, from Under the Silver Lake, modern kings who go with their brides into their tombs under Los Angeles are being manipulated. For their power, their influence, their wealth, and their sacred knowledge, they're still being manipulated. Or said another way, they didn't read the instructions correctly. This is a source of hope for me and many others. Namely, spiritual energy flows and is effective with love, harmony, community, and balance, not division and pain. Perhaps a very general and simplistic explanation for why so many globalist plans in the last 500 years always fail in the end. You're casting spells with only part of the correct instructions. So no matter how many women you killed in the West End of London in 1888, your spell will fail. Your spells will fail, and in the end, the light of the divine will defeat you. One item relating to the movie The Ninth Gate. It does have one of my favorite dialogue lines for those of us who work as consultants. Langela's character says to Johnny Depp, "You don't like me, do you?" And Depp replies, "I don't have to like you. You're a client and you pay well." Oh, it was a classic. Remember again, folks, E.M. Burlingame will be on Rogue on Tuesday the 15th and no program for me on July 18th. And yes, because I'm traveling again, so we all know what that means. I yield the floor.
Very well done, sir. Very well done. Again, folks, if you haven't been listening and you got to get your notebooks out and your dark roast ready, awesome intelligence drop. Fantastic. I have nothing else to say to that. Cowboy, anything you want to add?
The only thing I'd remind anybody who's seen, the Silver Lake.
I still haven't seen that movie.
What's that?
I have to see it.
Oh, you got.
Oh my God, dude!
You're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. All right. So at one, you're talking about messages and music and all that, and there's a point where he gets to kind of see the source of those messages. I don't want to ruin it, and you start to hear some of the music in which those messages were portrayed, and there's a lot of modern music, and then at one point they play "Ode to Joy," which is like from the 1200s.
Yeah.
So, what are they implying right there?
I've said, I mean, many of you have had to suffer through my stories about Under the Silver Lake. I I've literally lost track how many times I've seen that film. It is easily between 15 to 20 times, and I'm not kidding you, folks. Every so often, I become the DiCaprio moment from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where he's got his beer in his hand and leans forward because he sees something on TV he appeared in. Where I see something in that film I didn't notice the last time I saw it. And of course, remember, the people, this is no joke, the people involved in directing and getting the film Under the Silver Lake out there, this is no joke. Many of them are involved or were involved with people that were connected to MK Ultra. So again, it's another one of these, are they telling you more about the world in which we live? But
exactly.
Have faith, folks. Enjoy your weekends. Be good to each other.
And with that being said, folks, we are over and out. Cowboy, take it away.